So I'm a dancer, and I do a lot of different styles, from contemporary and modern to ballroom dance styles like tango and cha-cha. One style that I've gotten into since coming to college is heels. If you're not familiar with this style, it's a dance performed in high heels, often sort of stiletto heels, though they're not necessary for the dance. And it combines elements from street styles of dance and jazz. It has a focus on precision, sensuality, and confidence. It's a super fun style of dance, but it's sometimes seen as quite provocative and overly sexual. I started doing this style in my sophomore year of college, and as I've done it more and more, I've begun to think about how I'm perceived when doing heels dance and the ways that this perception might differ to my non-Black friends with whom I dance. I started thinking about how the Black body is marked in many different ways, and one of these ways is as hypersexual. So by doing heels dance, I felt that I was almost playing into a stereotype. But stereotype didn't feel like the right word to describe this relationship between Black womanhood and hypersexuality. It was more than that. What it actually was a controlling image of Black femininity. Patricia Hill Collins coined the term controlling images to refer to images which foster the creation of socially constructed representations of reality. These images serve to elevate dominant social groups and to subjugate marginalized social groups. They regulate behaviors and serve hegemonic interests. They're similar to stereotypes in that they create an image, often negative, of a certain group, but differ in that they affect reality differently. In this video, I'll begin with unpacking how exactly controlling images as a whole function and the role they play in facilitating the oppression of marginalized groups. Then I'll look specifically at the 4 prevalent controlling images of Black womanhood, which Collins discusses. Collins outlines some of the distinguishing features of controlling images. The first is that the overarching purpose of controlling images lies in normalizing and naturalizing social hierarchies within a given social context. Controlling images only obtain their controlling nature in specific social contexts. In other locations where there are different conceptions of race, class, gender, etc., these images wouldn't have the same meaning. Their meaning is contingent on the way that certain social constructs are established in a given context. So they lose their power outside of that context. The second feature is that controlling images resemble stereotypes, yet differ in how each conceptualizes social interaction. While controlling images are similar to stereotypes in some ways, there are key differences between the two. One of these differences is that stereotypes assume a causal relationship between belief and human behavior. People who hold prejudiced beliefs act according to their beliefs. So for example, if someone thinks all Black men are dangerous, then they might move seats if they're sitting down and a Black man comes and sits next to them. Therefore, this understanding of stereotypes suggests that if a person were to learn the errors of their beliefs, their behavior would change accordingly. On the other hand, controlling images focus less on the truth or falsity of the belief and more on the effects that the belief has on the power relations in society at large. This means that meaning is made by individuals rather than the belief itself. Individuals are responsible for how these controlling images affect power structures and the social phenomena created as a result of these structures. Thirdly, controlling images are hegemonic and, if they're seen at all, are evaluated differently by different social actors. It is usually easier to identify controlling images that are targeted towards marginalized groups because these are often inherently negative. But this doesn't mean that all controlling images are negative. They can still reinforce social hierarchies and have negative effects, even if the content of the image itself is positive. It's just more difficult to identify the positive ones because these ones often control the dominant group, which is harder to spot. Collins uses white women in interracial relationships as an example of how controlling images can affect dominant group members. The white women in these relationships are often judged and criticized because they're going against the norms of white femininity, which itself has its own controlling images to reinforce white privilege. This point also emphasizes that people may be judged differently for engaging in the same act because how one is judged is in part reliant on one's individual social privileges. Fourthly, individuals demonstrate varying degrees of awareness regarding the contours and significance of the controlling images applied to themselves and others. Some controlling images are much more visible than others, especially depending on the social context one is in. As I already mentioned, it's usually easier to identify controlling images targeted towards marginalized groups. But even so, many controlling images are so widely known that people fail to realize that they're controlling images, especially those of Black femininity. So, the extent to which controlling images are apparent differs depending on multiple factors. Fifthly, people bring varying degrees of awareness to how controlling images shape their everyday experiences, even if you are aware of the fact that images of certain groups shape both how individuals act and how they're perceived by others. You might not think that this applies to or affects you. So, Collins says that because of this, controlling images are also related to one's own internal process of individual subjectivity. Each individual decides how controlling images will affect their life. Finally, controlling images are inherently relational. Controlling images in a certain context can only be fully understood through the relation to others in that same context. The example Collins uses is that controlling images of African American women and those of Latinas help give each other meaning. This also means that changing a controlling image related to one group can have a ripple effect on the other groups within that social context, because they're all interconnected. Collins situates her examination of controlling images in the objectification of Black women. She looks specifically at how Black women are seen as the other. She writes that objectification is central to continuing this practice of othering. This objectification results in Black women's status as human being revoked. They become relegated to subhuman so that their subordination can be justified. Controlling images demonstrate just one method of maintaining the subordination and othering of Black women. In her book, Black Feminist Thought, Collins highlights 4 dominant controlling images that are attached to Black womanhood: the Mammy, the Matriarch, the Welfare Queen, and the Jezebel. The Mammy controlling image is that of a warm, affectionate, and submissive older Black woman. She's a domestic servant for white families and often the caretaker of their children, which leads to the neglect of her own children as a result. This controlling image acts as the standard against which Black women, especially Black mothers, are measured. They become penalized if they're not as nurturing as the Mammy. It also reinforces white superiority because the Mammy is submissive to her white employers. So by making this the standard of Black womanhood, it insinuates that Black women should remain submissive to white people. This image also plays into ideas on purity culture and masks the economic exploitation of Black women. An example of a Mammy from popular culture would be the well-known Aunt Jemima image, or the black maids in the novel and film The Help. Collins even goes so far as to say that Oprah Winfrey could be an example, but she notes that Oprah cleverly uses the Mammy image to gain trust from viewers and builds her platform. If you can't beat them, join them, I guess. The controlling image of the Mammy exists in a double bind with the image of the matriarch. The matriarch is portrayed as an aggressive, unfeminine black woman who neglects her family. She emasculates her husband and represents a bad black mother. However, this is in part because this controlling image is tied to that of the Mammy. She's only a bad mother because she's busy acting as a good black mother to the white families that she cares for in her role as the Mammy. But in the process, she ends up disregarding her own family. But this isn't how she's seen from a dominant perspective. From the outside, it simply looks like she's a failed Mammy. It also throws a wrench in the Western concept of the nuclear family, wherein the mother is submissive to the father who provides for the household. For the matriarch, she is the provider of the family. And in her household, she doesn't subscribe to the submissive personality that the Mammy does. The controlling image of the welfare mother, or welfare queen, depicts a lazy black woman who profits off the welfare that she receives from the government. This term was popularized by Ronald Reagan during his 1976 presidential campaign. This controlling image creates the idea that the black woman has irresponsibly put herself in a poverty-struck position. One of the reasons it paints her as irresponsible is due to her reckless pregnancies, which place her in a position of poverty. It's an updated version of the breeder woman, which was a controlling image during slavery, which suggested that black women had children more easily than white women and were more suited for having children than white women. She's also labeled as a bad mother, and yet another failed Mammy. This image both provides justification for being anti-welfare and controls black women's fertility. The Jezebel is a black woman who is essentially seen as a whore. This image is a means of controlling black women's sexuality. It places all black women in the category of the sexually aggressive woman. Like the breeder woman, this was a useful image during slavery because it provided justification for the increased fertility rate of black women in the sexual assault of black female slaves by white men. If black women were promiscuous and willing to show off their bodies, then this was a reason for white men to sleep with them, whether they consent or not. More recently, the Jezebel image has morphed into the hoochie. Collins describes how this image has permeated black culture in new and different ways. One clear example of it is in the music industry, especially in rap. For example, the women of Nicki Minaj's Anaconda music video would represent this Jezebel or hoochie image. This controlling image lies at the margins of gender, race, and sexuality, and it is yet another means of controlling black women's fertility. So that's a little outline on controlling images. They're everywhere, throughout media, politics, popular culture, and more, to the point that it's honestly quite difficult to identify them. Like, who would have thought that a controlling image would be present when I'm dancing? But they're so ubiquitous and often deeply woven into social norms that we don't recognize the controlling nature of them. They work to reinforce hegemonic power structures and serve dominant interests, and recognizing controlling images is significant given how they shape our understanding of reality.